The first time Charlotte heard the sound, she thought it was an owl. A long, hollow whistle drifted between the trees, almost melodic. But the longer she listened, the more she realized something was wrong. Owls didn't repeat the exact same note with the exact same spacing. This noise was timed, deliberate, like someone exhaling slowly through their teeth with unnatural precision. She told herself it was nothing. She had come here to escape things that were something. Her breakup, her job falling apart, her father's constant medical appointments. All the noise she couldn't stand anymore. So she packed her tent, her notebook, and drove 3 hours into rural northern Montana to Pine Barren Ridge, a stretch of forest so isolated that even locals joked you shouldn't go alone. Nobody except her. By evening, her campfire crackled softly. The wind shifted the trees in slow waves. And that whistle returned longer this time, thinner, like someone dragging a finger around the lip of a glass. Charlotte sat up a little straighter. Her first mistake was calling out. "Hello? Is someone there?" Nothing answered. The woods swallowed her voice whole. She shook off the unease and tried to write, but the hairs on the back of her neck were already bristling. She didn't like how tight the trees were here, how the shadows between trunks were pitch black and too still. Around midnight, she crawled into her tent, zipped herself in, and listened to the fire die out. She was almost asleep when she heard a sound that snapped her wide awake, a single, heavy footstep right beside her tent. Charlotte froze. Another step followed, slow, intentional. Twigs cracked under the weight. This wasn't a deer or a wandering animal. This was human. Something scraped lightly down the nylon wall of her tent. Something long like fingers. Charlotte pressed a hand over her mouth to keep from gasping as the thing outside exhaled, softly, right against the thin fabric inches from her head. She didn't sleep after that. Morning came gray and silent. Charlotte stepped out cautiously. The air felt cold or wrong. When she checked the mud around her tent, her stomach dropped. Bare footprints, human, huge, fresh. They circled her tent in an uneven loop, some prints normal, others strangely angled, as if the person or whatever it was had changed their walk halfway around. She felt sick. She should pack up and go home, but part of her stubbornly insisted she was overreacting. Maybe it was a drifter or a local hunter cutting through. This was rural forest, strange things happened. That was her second mistake. By evening, the wind roared through the treetops. Her fire struggled against it, and the sky turned a heavy, suffocating shade of dark. Charlotte wrapped herself in her jacket and watched the flames flicker. Just after midnight, the whistling returned, this time from somewhere behind her. She spun around. Nothing. Then it came from the left. Something was circling her camp, slowly, purposefully. Charlotte grabbed her flashlight, heart pounding, and shone it wildly through the trees. Nothing reflected back but empty darkness. The circle tightened around her with chilling intent. "Hey!" she shouted. "I know you're out there." The whistling stopped. Silence fell so thick she could hear her own breathing echo in her ears. Then a whisper slid through the dark, low, breathy, inches from her right ear. "Don't turn around." Charlotte froze. Every muscle locked. Another whisper came, closer, almost brushing her skin. "You weren't supposed to see me." A sudden rush of air moved behind her, as if something darted away into the trees. She didn't question it. She sprinted to her tent, zipped herself inside, grabbed her pocket knife, and stayed awake, trembling. Hours passed. The wind died. The fire died. And the forest dropped into dead silence. Charlotte was drifting between exhaustion and fear when she heard breathing. Outside, slow, wet, heavy breaths that didn't sound human. A shadow pressed against the tent wall. It was tall, too tall, with limbs that made no sense in silhouette. A head leaned close, mouth-shaped skin bulging against the nylon. "I'm going to come inside," it whispered. Charlotte snapped. She slashed her knife upward, ripping open the tent wall, and bolted into the forest. Branches tore at her arms as she ran. Behind her, twigs snapped and soft, horrible laughter followed her, not loud, not manic, just delighted, curious. She didn't look back. She ran until her legs failed and collapsed near a dry creek bed. For a moment there was silence. Then a whisper floated above her from the branches overhead. "Don't look up." Charlotte's entire body shivered, but she forced her eyes upward. Something pale crouched above her. Long-limbed, joints bent wrong, fingers curling around the branch like claws. Its skin was stretched tight over a skull that wasn't shaped like any human skull. Two white, lidless eyes stared at her with childlike fascination. Then it smiled, without lip skin pulling back to reveal rows of tiny, pointed teeth. Charlotte screamed and rolled back as the creature dropped from the branch with silent grace. She ran. She didn't care where. She sprinted blindly until her headlights glowed between trees her car. She fumbled with her keys, dove inside, locked the doors, and peeled out so fast dirt exploded behind her tires. In her rearview mirror, illuminated by her fading headlights, a pale figure stood perfectly still in the middle of the road, watching and whistling. Charlotte didn't stop driving until she hit the highway. She didn't stop shaking for days. But now, weeks later, she still hears that same hollow whistle outside her apartment window at night. Timed, deliberate, patient. And every morning, when she checks the dirt by her door, she finds footprints. Bare, large, fresh. The first thing that told me something was wrong in Ridgeway Pines wasn't a sound, it was the absence of sound. Not normal forest quiet, not peaceful quiet. This was the kind of silence that feels engineered, like someone pressed mute on the world. And if I'd listened to my instincts, I would have turned around and driven home. But I didn't. My name is Almina, and this is the story I can't escape no matter how far I run. I went camping alone after a long, ugly breakup. I just wanted to clear my head, to breathe somewhere far from people. Ridgeway Pines, a remote forest in rural northern Idaho, felt perfect. A lake, thick trees, and miles from the nearest town. I arrived just before sunset. The sky was orange, the air smelled sharp with pine needles, and the lake looked like glass. I set up my tent, stacked my firewood, and tried to convince myself I was finally relaxing. But the deeper the sun sank, the heavier the silence became. No insects, no birds. Even the wind felt like it had stopped on purpose. As the sky darkened, I started to sense I wasn't alone. Around 8 p.m., just after I lit the fire, I noticed movement across the lake. At first, I thought it was a tree shadow, but then it shifted, and a tall figure stepped out from the tree line. It stood perfectly still, facing me. It didn't raise a hand or take a step forward. It just watched. I felt cold pressure crawl up my spine. Something about the shape was off, not its height, but how motionless it was. Humans sway without noticing. They breathe, they fidget, they blink. This thing didn't. It was a perfect vertical silhouette, like it had been carved from the dark. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it across the lake. The beam landed on empty trees. The figure was gone. Not walking away. Gone. I told myself I was overtired, that maybe it was a tree trunk or a shadow. But that night in my tent, exhaustion didn't matter. Around midnight, something started moving around my campsite. But here's the part that still wakes me up shaking. There were no footsteps. Only the quiet shifting of leaves being disturbed. Fast, then slow, then fast again. Like something circling the tent, inspecting it, studying it. I held my breath, knife in hand, staring at the tent fabric, trembling with every light brush of whatever was out there. But no footsteps meant it wasn't walking. I leaned forward slowly, unzipped the tent just an inch, and peeked outside. My campfire had burned down to glowing coals. In the faint light, I saw a shadow moving across the ground, long, stretched, distorted. Someone tall was standing just out of my sight. But the ground was undisturbed. No tracks, no shifting dirt. Just the shadow. I zipped the tent shut, shaking so hard the knife slipped from my hand. I stayed awake the entire night. That rustling didn't stop until the sky turned bluish-gray with dawn. When I stepped outside terrified, I expected animal prints. Instead, I found something much worse, a single boot. A man's boot. Old, filthy, half-torn, as if something had gnawed on it. And it definitely wasn't mine. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe another camper left it. Maybe a ranger dropped it. I forced myself to ignore the dread crawling around in my stomach. I made breakfast. I walked along the lake. And that's when everything shattered. I saw the shadow again, but this time it wasn't on the ground. It was in the water. I leaned over the lake's surface, looking at my reflection. And standing behind me, in the reflection only, was that tall silhouette. Perfectly still. Perfectly black. No details, no face. Just a stretched shadow shaped like a person. I spun around, heart hammering in my throat. No one was there. My hands were trembling. My vision blurred. I knew then that whatever this was, it wasn't a person. And it wasn't leaving. I tried distracting myself by gathering wood farther into the forest. I didn't go far, just enough to not see the lake. But in the middle of the woods, leaning against a fallen log, was the second boot. Same size, same ripped leather. But something sat inside it. Bones. Small, brittle bones. Human-sized. I dropped the boot so fast it bounced off my leg. I turned to run back only to find the shadow standing between two trees, blocking my path. This time it didn't vanish. Instead, it slid forward. Not step. Slide. Like something was dragging it across the ground without touching the earth. It moved wrong. Too smooth. Too straight. Too fast. I ran. Branches cut my arms. My breath tore out in gasps. But behind me there was no sound of pursuit. Nothing. Just the echo of my own panic. Yet every time I dared glance back, the shadow was closer, gliding forward without ever walking. I broke through the trees and stumbled into my campsite. And everything was wrong. My tent was unzipped. My backpack had been emptied onto the dirt. And etched into the ground with a stick was a message: "Don't turn around." Shaking, I realized something was standing behind me. I didn't need to look to know. I felt it, its height, its presence, the cold weight of its shadow stretching toward my feet. I swear I felt breath on the back of my neck, even though I'd never heard this thing breathe. I ran for my car, fumbling the keys. When I slammed the door shut, I finally turned toward the campsite. The shadow towered behind my tent, taller than the trees, unmoving. Then, as the engine turned over, it vanished again. I sped down the forest road so fast I nearly popped a tire. When I hit the highway, I drove all the way home without stopping once. But the story didn't end there. After showering and trying to convince myself I was safe, I walked into my bedroom, and in the corner was the boot. The same mud-caked, ripped, rotting boot from the campsite, sitting upright, facing my bed. I moved the next day, but the silence followed. Sometimes at night, when I'm lying awake, I hear rustling in the corner of my room. No footsteps, never footsteps. Just that shifting sound, like something moving without walking. And every morning, the shadows in my room look just a little too long. A little too still. A little too aware. Olivia had always loved camping, but something about Lake Marlowe in rural Oregon gave her an uneasy thrill. It wasn't to the isolation. She decamped in the wilderness many times before, but the lake itself. It was still and glassy, like a black mirror, reflecting the sky perfectly. She and her friends had driven hours to reach this remote spot far from any town or cell service, and the first night had been everything they expected. A crackling campfire, roasted marshmallows, and the usual teasing about who could handle the scariest ghost story. But as night fell, Olivia noticed something that made her skin crawl. The first sign had been subtle. She had gone down to the water's edge to refill their water bottles, the air cold and misty. The lake reflected the stars above, but for a fleeting moment, she saw something else. A ripple passed across the water, distorting the reflections of her friends around the campfire. Their faces stretched in unnatural ways, their smiles wrong, eyes hollow. And then came the giggle, light, high-pitched, almost childlike. It echoed off the water, but there was no one there. Olivia froze, her heartbeat spiking, and blinked. The lake went still again, reflecting only the night sky and the trees along the shore. She shook her head, convincing herself she'd imagined it. That night, she lay awake in her tent. The forest outside was alive with the usual sounds: crickets, distant owls, the whisper of wind through the trees. But beneath it all, she thought she could hear something else. Footsteps on the dirt. A faint giggle again, drifting closer and then retreating. She told herself it was the wind, maybe a fox or raccoon, but it felt deliberate, like something was watching, waiting. The next morning, Olivia suggested they hike along the lake's edge before breakfast. They were joking, teasing one another, trying to shake off the unease of the previous night. But when she turned to call Mark, the one who had teased her most about being scared, he wasn't there. "Mark?" she called, panic creeping in. Her voice sounded too loud in the quiet forest. "Where is he?" whispered Jenna, her eyes wide. The others scanned the tree line. There was no sign of him. They spread out, calling his name, searching under trees and behind rocks, but the forest seemed endless. Every time Olivia thought she caught a glimpse of someone moving between the trees, it vanished when she blinked. She felt it then, that same chill from the night before, the feeling of being watched, followed, something unseen tracking their movements. After nearly an hour of searching, they returned to the campsite. The fire was out, the tents untouched. No sign of Mark, just the still glassy lake. And as Olivia's heart sank, she noticed the water again. The reflection was wrong. Instead of seeing her friends huddled together, the lake showed the five of them, but Mark's reflection was there, standing at the edge of the water, staring directly at her. She blinked, and it was gone. That night, Olivia could hardly sleep. Every time her eyes closed, she saw the distorted reflection in the lake. She could hear the laughter now, faint, almost taunting. It was coming from all around, soft and childlike, but impossible to place. Somewhere deep in her chest, a fear blossomed that this was not a joke, not a trick of her imagination. The next morning, they tried to convince themselves it had all been nerves. They hiked to a nearby clearing, trying to act normal. But it didn't matter what they did. The lake had a way of pulling at them, twisting reality. As they stopped to rest, Olivia noticed something on the shore. Footprints. Not human, not animal, circling the campsite, leading nowhere. She knelt, heart hammering, staring at them. The prints disappeared into the water itself, fading as if swallowed by the lake. And then the first disappearance happened. Jenna had gone to fetch water from the lake. Olivia watched her crouch down, the sunlight glinting off the calm surface. Suddenly, the reflection in the water shifted. Jenna's reflection lingered while the real Jenna leaned closer. Olivia's scream caught in her throat as the water bubbled and rippled violently, and when it settled, Jenna was gone. No splash, no sound, just gone. Only the faint echo of laughter drifted across the trees. Panic set in. The remaining three scrambled back to the campsite, shouting her name. But when they returned, the tents were gone. Not stolen, not dismantled, simply vanished. In their place was the lake, smooth and black, reflecting the forest like a mirror. Olivia felt a sudden weight on her chest, a pressure that made it hard to breathe. She turned slowly. Behind her, the reflections of her friends appeared in the water, distorted, contorted, eyes hollow, faces twisted in silent screams. And then came the sound of tiny footsteps, circling, getting closer, like something walking on the water itself. Olivia ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to escape. The forest seemed endless, trees bending and stretching in ways that made her stumble. Every so often she glanced at the lake, and the reflections moved with her, always ahead, always watching. By evening, she was alone. The others, Matt, Rachel, and Chris, gone. Their screams, if they had screamed, never reached her. She stopped by the water's edge, gasping, hands shaking. The lake was calm, perfectly reflecting the stars now, but as she looked closer, she saw them, the reflections. Her friends, faces pale and frozen, staring at her from beneath the water, as if trapped in some otherworldly prison. She wanted to leave, but when she turned, the forest had changed. The paths she had walked only hours ago were gone, replaced by endless identical trees. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, like blood. She tried to call out, but her voice came back distorted, warped, echoed in her own ears. Hours passed. She didn't know how. Every attempt to climb a hill, reach a road, or find the campsite led her back to the same spot, the edge of the lake. And then she heard it again, the faint giggle, closer this time, coming from the water itself. She fell to her knees, shaking, and saw it. A tiny hand emerging from the lake, pale and dripping, reaching for her. Another followed, and then more, dozens of them, floating just beneath the surface, their eyes black, their mouths forming the same childish laughter. Olivia screamed and ran blindly, falling over roots, tearing her clothes on branches. She had no direction, no hope. Eventually, exhausted, she collapsed near the water, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the lake. The reflections had changed. No longer just her friends, she saw herself trapped beneath the water, staring back with hollow eyes, smiling at her. She tried to look away, but the image burned into her vision. By dawn, the forest was silent. The lake mirrored the clear morning sky, calm and peaceful as if nothing had happened. A hiker passing by later might have seen a lone figure crouched at the shore, staring into the water. A young woman named Olivia, trembling, whispering to herself about reflections and laughter. And if you were to look closely, you might see dozens of faces beneath the water, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent screams, waiting for the next camper foolish enough to step near Lake Marlowe.